Our goal is to bring experiential insights from the trenches, as we coach and as we work with many of our customers who are actually working on the cutting edge of technology and digital projects. So now let me just move on to the next slide. So Moses, Moses is the CEO and head of excellence at Brillio. He's led the cloud transformation of the enterprise. Over the last 2 decades, he's led multiple management initiatives, change management to drive better value for customers. And he's particularly good at imagining products that break barriers, right, in the interest of customers. And he's won India top 25 would be nice. Top 25 CA awards in 2006 in the architecture event, and ICMG architecture event. A little bit about myself. I'm a consultant with PM Power, expertise on project program management. Many years, decades of years. Right? There's not much more, and a lot of exposure with international clients. So I used to work with Convergence Software, HP and Fidelity. Have been with PM Power for a long time. So let's move on quickly. I think this is something that Jyoti already spoke about. How you can actually ask questions to the speakers. So let me just move on. I think I've been in the IT industry for I think nearly 1981, so that puts about 37 years. And these are really exciting times. I think it has never been a dull moment, but more so now, with all that's happening with the digital transformation. Whole industries are changing, or there is a threat that they're going to change, right? So what we found is, as people who are in the technology space, we have, actually I think we have great responsibility to make sure that all these transformation projects or programs should end up as projects and programs within us, right? And so much more in India. I think we have a great responsibility and an opportunity, right, to make sure that these succeed. We've actually done a lot of coaching, and actually we worked with many clients. We execute a lot of these projects, and we saw that there's a lot of talk about Agile, and there are many things talked about. Which talk about different methods, different ways of doing things, different tools. But one thing we found that the key to success is a change in mind shift, right? That is required. I just love this, quote from Aristotle Onassis, a shipping magnet for a change, not a philosopher, I guess, but it says, we must free ourselves of the hope that the sea will ever rest. We must learn to sail in high winds. So I think those who've executed projects for years and years earlier need to learn to sail in high winds, right? And we found the key is mind shift. So at least for today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on the change in mind shift rather than change in methods or capabilities, and maybe that's something for other seminars. But our entire focus of myself and Moses is going to be on this, and as much as me, who has been working on coaching teams and working with multiple clients, Moses is eminently qualified to talk about some of the mind shifts. And the good thing is he's always he's truly a thought leader. He's thought about some of these things. So let me hand it over to Moses to talk about a couple of mind shifts, and then I'll come back and cover a couple of more mind shifts. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Anant. Mute your speakers. Give us a second. Mute your speaker, please. Yeah. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for that nice introduction. So we're going to speak on few key mind shifts, right? Now, the first mind shift I'm going to talk is the mind shift that the customer doesn't know what he wants. Two, the customer doesn't need to know what he wants. Now, let me demystify this. Now, if you go to, say, some 20 or 30 post-mortem reviews of projects, why things did not go the way it was supposed to go, one constant common reason that you can really hear is that the customer did not tell it upfront. The customer did not know it. They were as much clueless as we were, right? So, and you would have heard this multiple times. But the question is that if that is the reality, then how do we really react? Now, what you see on the right side on the screen is a theory proposed somewhere in 1980s by a marketing head of a company. He proposed this gaps. Now, there is a customer view of the product as wanted by the person, right? Now, but then what they really get is not to what they want. So there's a gap, customer gap. But then there is a team which produces the software or produces the product. Now they specify something and finally they end up deliver something, right? Now that's a producer gap. So there is the gap that emanates, which really doesn't deliver to what the customer's real want is. Now, this is the theory which pretty much inspired quite a bit of quality thinking, quite a bit of methodologies and all that. But there is a interesting problem with it. The problem is this. It assumes that the customer does know what he wants. Now, that may be true in some scenarios. The question is it true across? Let's take great products. There is someone who said about Steve Jobs like this. Steve Jobs knew the need of people than what they themselves knew about their needs. Now, what the statement finally says is, there is a real need which even the person going through the need really doesn't know till someone shows it to them. You can take the example of the Walkman, right? The Walkman was exactly a very similar case. When the guy who pioneered the Walkman started seeing people taking those big phone sets in their ears, the music sets in their ears and started walking, he really realized that if I can put the music in their ears, how will they feel? How will the young man in America feel? And that was the genesis of a Walkman. The question is, if there is a way to get to the need and really deliver that, that is exactly what the real customer needs. It is not about someone really specifying. That's exactly what great success in the industry just tells that. Now, this is I'm going to talk to amplify this point of where the problem is, especially in this mindset, the customer, we know, rather the customer knows what he wants, right? This is top 20 reasons of startups failure, right? If you really look at the list of reasons given there, you will see a pattern. The first top is there was no need. They developed the product, right? That is 42%. But look at one more other thing. How many of them failed because of an external reason versus an internal reason? You'll be surprised. Majority are internal reasons, right? So the point is, if someone can really understand the real need, that's where the clue lies, and then can really go towards building that need. The question is, how do we find it? I'll give you one more data. This is today there are roughly about 4.5 million apps between Google Play Store and the iOS store, right? So, and this is interesting data. How many of them hold the app after 3 days? And how many of the percentage hold the app after 90 days? Certain apps have a very high retention rate, but then pretty much 91% get uninstalled within 90th day, right? That's the statistics. So the question then is, why are the success rates so elusive when we design solutions? Why is that we are not able to understand the real customer's need? Let's look at what's really happening in the industry to answer this question, right? Look at the bottom most. Let's take the ambiguity aspect. If you really look at somewhere, go down the lane 20 years back or 15 years back, right, where a lot of solutions were built. most of the solutions were primarily automating something which was existing and manually working, right? They were either done in a certain different way, they brought it into an ERP, or they built a custom solution to automate something which was already existing and being done on ground. So the level of the outcome was pretty much known what it has to be. The way of doing it may be different, but what the outcome was very clear. But look at the solutions today. Many of the solutions are brand new. They were not operating that way in a manual form or in the form that we can imagine. So the solutions are very imaginative. The moment the solutions are imaginative, the first thing that comes is ambiguity increase. Now, take that ambiguity point to the next level. What happens, right? The solutions seldom are standalone today. There are deep integrations that are typical of any application. The amount of, I have one theory, the number of users increases, the complexity automatically increases, right? The number of integration points increases, the complexity automatically increases. So if you really look at the solutions today, the market is wide open, even for applications we do for organizations. Every organization looks for a solution which can hit across a large section of the organization, right? So that complexity by design increases, right? As the solutions are complex, our solutions are imaginative, and the complexity increases. Now, there is a lot of figuring out to do. The moment there is a lot of figuring out to do, the volatility automatically increases. And technology options are high. And everyone seems to have a view on the way solution has to be, right? So because of the plethora of views that is possible today, and technology is disrupting, the volatility increases as well. And all these things brings up to the uncertainty. So this is the real world that we are living in. Even a project that an organization like Brilio builds, you can see all these elements that of VUCA that is in play. Now, this is a study we did of projects that we are doing, right? Now, what I want to highlight in this is two key points. There are traditional elements which still stay. For example, customer engagement still stays. We have to make money, still stays. The team aspect has to be managed, still stays. But what has really completely changed is the middle box in the dotted line that you see. Projects have become short-term, much more fixed price, and there are multiple disciplines that come into play to deliver the software. So there's a huge amount of integration among people and the types of people skills. And then many times it may also involve other vendors to get the end-to-end solution. And amidst all this uncertainty, so it seems unmanageable. But the question is, this is the reality. So this is really an abstraction from the real data on the ground. So that brings to the point, how do we deal with it? Now, one thing I think to deal with the customer doesn't know is to understand the fundamental theory that requirements is just a hypothesis, not a fact. When a requirement is stated, we always took the premise that this is value. If we can deliver this requirement as is, it is going to deliver value, right? Today, the problem is when we say this is a stated, it is just a theory. It is not really a fact. Then someone has to qualify it. So that brings to the value, that brings to the point, then what is really the value? Now, to understand what is value, let us look at this simple example. We all have used either a Ola or a Uber. Now, industry has been disrupted there, right? Now, I'm going to drive the definition of value through this example that will help to deal with this challenge of how do we move from the paradigm that we want the customer to spell out the requirement to really validate and do what is right, right? Now, we live in a world where we really were running the world where we had to call for a taxi, right? Now, what is the interesting fact there? There was first, someone had to remember the number, right, of which number to call, so that you really know and you can speak to an operator and tell where you are and get a taxi for yourself. So that's the number one problem, because many times people do not know the number where to call and to get connected. Now, assume that we get connected. The second was, now that the phone is connected to the person, the operator there has to be really knowledgeable in a city like Bangalore or city like any other large city to spot me where really I am, get the address, note it down right, and all those things. That's a second challenge. The third challenge is that person has to find a cab or a taxi, the cab which is attached to them near them, which kind of puts them to the third challenge. And once they identify that guy also and tells that guy and gives the order, go and pick this customer at this place, the fourth challenge is the driver in the car has to find me. So how these things used to demonstrate? It used to demonstrate with one thing, that the amount of time taken for me to hire the cab used to be somewhere an hour, sometimes in maybe half an hour, sometimes maybe as high as 1 hour. They used to tell, we commit our service to less than 2 hours we'll reach. We should plan ahead. Now what happened in the industry? Someone came with an app. What is the first challenge? To know a number to call. Now all I need is an app. So the first barrier is broken. What's the second thing? The operator has to find me what my location is. The app finds it. So the second barrier is broken. What's the third one? The operator has to find a vehicle near me. Now the app finds it automatically. The third barrier is broken. Then the driver has to spot me and come to my location, the fourth barrier. And now the app guides the guy. So if you really look at it, all the key barriers have been broken. And that is what someone like a Ola or a Uber could give me a confidence that within so and so time that I can actually get the vehicle, right? So that confidence barrier is also broken and the time barrier is also broken. Now that brings me to the definition of what is value. So value fundamentally is removal of a barrier. Now, the moment we define it, we can qualify the definition for each of my requirements, right? Whatever is stated. Does it really remove the barrier? Now, if we can really move from what is stated as a hypothesis to really qualify it upfront and say that, yes, this one removes this real life barrier for the user, and then move towards it, then we are not building a series of assumptions. We are really building something closer to what changes the life of the user. And you will see with this, the product really is evolving. Now, there's a famous saying, right? Requirements change, but product evolves, right? Now, with every step that we take can help build value to the end user, to the real user on which the barriers for them in real life are broken, then you can be pretty much certain that the product is moving as evolving as we do, and it is making an impact right from the first step of building the product. I hope that sets the tone that the engineering team can move from being uncertain about whatever they are building to really a certain amount of certainty that they are really driving towards making an impact. So that way the engineering team can really guide the customer to decide what is the right thing, which makes the difference. Now, I just want to make 2 points in passing on agility, because agile methodology per se is designed to build in an evolutionary fashion, but there are real challenges, right? Now, I think if we can keep few principles of agility in mind, something much more practical in nature, that we can measure it, then it really helps us to get the best out of agile methodology or agility, right? Now, the first point I want to leave is 50% complete is better than 75% work in progress. Now, it may sound obvious, but the real thing is there was a question sometime back. I was taking a training. There's a guy who asked a question. Every time the time gets crunched, the scope doesn't change. Whether it is you call agile methodology or anything, there is no easy answers for it. The only way to face that situation is take a small chunk, take it to completion, And my practical experience is whenever we have been able to show real completeness or real finished goods, even to have 60% or 50% in the time frame, the customer has been better reactive and helping rather than saying everything is work in progress, right? So that's the fundamental principle of agility, which helps to drive better collaboration with the customer as well. Multitasking versus focus. Focus brings good results, brings higher productivity. Having multiple things running parallel really kills productivity. Now, what is Agile solution? Take it to the smallest entity and take it to closure. Make that person work on one thing that is atomic, take it to a logical closure, and then take the next step. Now, the problem is many times this gets violated. This principle gets violated. A person is working on 5 things and nothing gets completed. Now, think of your teams, get that shift from the mind that can we make it atomic and clear and take that to closure and see the value before we move to the next step. That really brings higher productivity. Now, in an engineering team, there is a recent example. The biggest constraint was the development team, which builds the software and demos it to the customer. But what is exactly happening? The other constraints of decisions on architecture, decisions on final decisions on requirements, nothing was clear. So the engineering team was actually doing useless work. If only the team could have really prioritized, this is the primary constraint and everything else has to feed into this primary constraint of the development team, the productivity of the development team would have been higher, and the project could have just completed many weeks in advance. Now, finally, that's what they did in the last month, and they finished the project on time. Now, find out what's the primary constraint and feed into it, because that flow is what is designed for a high success. So these are a few points in passing about the first mind shift. I'm moving to the second mind shift. I'll try to make it brief. We have less time. The second mind shift that I'm talking about is how does a leader, how does a person look at taking ownership? Now, what this picture shows is very interesting, right? When the uncertainty is high, the sense of ownership is low. When the uncertainty is low, the human tendency is, yes, I would like to take it up. But what the reality is, we know that uncertainty is high. The real leadership required is to take ownership under uncertainty, right? We have to be on quadrant 4, not on the lower quadrant or the quadrant 2 when the uncertainty is on the higher side, right? So now, how do we do this? This is another amplification of this. If you really look at it, though, this is an article I pulled out from somewhere, whether Waterfall versus Agile, and as the ages passed, now there is a much better success and all that with Agile methodology. But still what the picture shows is the amount of ground to cover is still on the higher side, right? There is huge amount of projects still being really challenged on ground as we speak. Now, that brings to the point, how do we really deal this aspect, right? Now, risk management as a theory is very old. It's not new. And we have, and the body of knowledge has fairly remained same, right? Now, if you really look at it, the 4 strategies like avoid, mitigate, or transfer or accept has remained the same. Now, once a project has been kicked off, the ability to avoid is actually on the lower side. Ability to transfer is literally not there. Accept for a big risk is very risky in itself, right? So the only option left out is mitigate. The question is, though we leave people we say that you have to take ownership and drive, many times industry hasn't helped the project managers to really have a practical view of it. Now, what as a mind shift, right? As a mindset, right? How do we encourage a person to take ownership? Is fundamentally to deal with risks, right? Now, look at this picture. If a project moves from concept to usage through multiple sprints, there is a setup sprint, we typically call as sprint 0. Then we have the sprints running multiple rounds of sprints, and then it's a final release, and then usage. Many times it may not get released every 3 weeks, but maybe a cycle. And a set of releases makes the product really largely usable. Initial releases maybe only for few people and all that, right? So it goes through a cycle. Now, take every risk. The risk could be in form of, I don't know how the performance is going to be in reality, right? That is unknown. Any unknown is a risk. Or it could be something like how will the users react to my product, right? Will it really change their life? Or it could be some things to do with some assumptions that I have made, right? This is the way things will be. So there can be assumptions which leading to risk, or dependencies leading to risk, or the product characteristics leading to risk. There can be multiple things. But the practical view would be to list all that and kind of estimate, because every risk has to come to pass. It has to come to a reality, certainty at some point. The question is, will it come in the usage level? Will it come in the final rounds of testing or somewhere before I make it live? Or will it come during later sprints? Or will it come during what time will it really, if I don't do anything about it, when will I really see the light of it, what the real issue is, right? So that is the first point that you plot. Then the question is, when that comes, if that comes, then the cost we pay will typically be very high. Can I do something about it upfront to advance the point of certainty, either 100% or to a large extent to make a judgment call? I can at least be surprised by the outcome of trying to deal with it, either by involving the users or doing a proof of concept or doing a judgment call with key stakeholders. The idea is to, how do I get to a point of certainty, at least to a larger extent on that aspect upfront. Now this thinking really, though it may be so simple, is pretty powerful, right? This is what can help the team, the manager, to really take ownership especially when there is high certainty, because this can really give the direction. Now, what are the points of certainty? Anything that the user can see and experience is something which is risk. And if we cannot predict how it's going to be, a experience could be performance experience, experience could be UI, experience could be anything. The number of clicks the user can have to perform his task, or the amount of context the person has to have before using the app. It can be anything to do with it. If it is unknown, it's something which the team needs to really worry about. There are requirements that the team may be unsure of, or could be dependencies, assumptions. It can be anything. Now, making a list of it, as if you're doing a post-mortem upfront, making the list of it, finding what's the point of certainty, advancing it, really can help deal with this ownership aspect. I'll leave this thought and I'll close this topic. Ownership is taken, not given. Now, let me amplify this a bit, right? This is actually a story of, you can guess the company. I don't want to name the company, but this is fairly same across multiple things. One of the common features of many failed companies is that the management or the managers or the leaders did not want to hear bad news and wanted to do something about it to solve it upfront. They allowed it to simmer and simmer and simmer till it became a cancer, right? It became the culture of the company. So taking ownership is about dealing with the problems at the earliest, like the way we talked about in the theory. Now, there's few key principles on it. If you have to take ownership, one of the thing is, there's a military principle on it, right? The military principle is you cannot stop. You have to keep moving. Now, it may sound very awkward, but the thing is, the progress brings people together. Now, how do you progress? That's the next question. There is a challenge. There is nearly something not possible. Now, looking at options, right? And bringing all the stakeholders together on the options and making them jointly own provides a sense of working together, thinking together, right? That's the military principle. You don't stop, you keep moving forward, right? And the thinking that impediments are bad, to impediments actually give a chance to show a person's leadership skill, right? Now, bringing visibility on the impact you make, on the adoption, on the change, on the progress, anything. Visibility is a double-edged sword. It exposes, it brings the problem to the fore, at the same time exposes the team which is driving that. It can work either ways, but then it at least brings the problem as everyone's problem, right? And communication. So these are few key things to keep in mind to drive the point. Ownership is taken, not actually given to a person, right? In general. So I'll leave the second mind shift this way, right? In case of uncertainty, typical natural tendency is to shun it, but a person who really wants to make an opportunity, make a difference, can see this as a real opportunity, deal with things and make it certain at the earliest, and then the sense of purpose gets really enlarged. So these are first two mind shifts. I'll hand it over to Anant for the rest of the mind shifts that we can really think through.
That was really amazing, actually. We should talk about this military principle. I love that, actually. Keep moving, cannot stop. So we can't afford to be paralyzed by all the uncertainty, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so let me take this forward to mind shift number 3. Okay. So mind shift number 3 is about negotiating with customers to connecting and influencing them. I think, I like this, sailing the stormy seas. There's another nice quote about sailing. There's so many examples in sailing you think about, running projects in the VUCA world. The pessimist complains of the wind, the optimist expects to change. And the realist adjusts the sails. So we have to figure out, the tough part is figuring out what the sails are and how do you adjust them. And here's what, whenever today, we coach lots of managers in the industry. I think, from PM we've coached over 1,000 managers out there. And I'll say the number one problem they have is, I just have this difficult customer, right? And now in the digital world, actually, it's just not the customer being difficult. I mean, the whole environment is difficult, right? It's just a choppy seas. You got to be able to manage and work with the customer to navigate, right? That's really the problem. There is no such thing like a difficult customer or demanding customer or anything like that, I think. So we found, traditionally the idea was, we have these contracts with the customer and we have a change management process. And this is how we work with the customer, and often negotiating was the way. I'm not saying there is no room for negotiating. We'll talk a little bit about that. There is some room. There are times you have to negotiate. But primarily your mind shift has got to be, connecting and influencing them. I found often this becomes more difficult if you remember the characteristics of typical projects that Moses was showing there. One of the things we are finding is these projects are not like, 2-year, 3-year projects, right? They are becoming shorter projects within which people are expecting, results, right? So what that means is there's not a whole lot of time for you to connect, influence, build a relationship, right? We used to talk about these long-term engagements, right? 3-year engagements where, we built a great relationship with the customer. But how about doing that in 3 months, right? So that becomes a real challenge. And we found this is a definite mind shift. And so if you want to stop complaining and adjust the sales, these are two things to do. So we'll focus on influencing mainly, and we'll spend a little bit of time on what it means to negotiate as well. So this is actually a very nice influencing pyramid from Arbinger Institute. And I found this, we've used this all the time. And most of the managers that I talk to and work with in a coaching situation find this very, very effective in practical terms, right? So, for example, we told one of the managers, you should kind of ask the manager questions and then listen to them, right? And then build a bit of rapport and all that. So he says, look, I asked. So he said, okay, I'll go and ask the customer. So he's the next weekly call. He asked the customer, hey, how was your weekend? And the customer responded, fine. Okay, hey, how's family and what's happening? Yeah, they're good. And then he moved on to the transactions of the week, right? And this person comes on and says, look, I don't know, I'm trying to ask questions, but nothing is happening. Right? So there is a bigger problem, obviously, right? The bigger problem is, there is a relationship issue. So what this pyramid actually talks about, you need to educate and communicate, right? Therefore, you can influence them in some direction. But if that fails, you need to be able to listen and learn, right? And if you want to do that right, you got to build a relationship. And there are times building relationship with others who have influence over that person. You may find it difficult to build rapport with this person. For example, you want to build a rapport with them, but they are available for a call, once in a quarter. I mean, how do you influence them, right? It's very difficult to do, right? So then they found someone else who has influence over that person, right? And they worked with this person. So, somehow when they connect out there, either in overseas or wherever, there is a good influence. They hear good things about you there, right? So I think the model is very powerful. The most important thing about this model is that solution to problem at a level is always at the levels below, right? If you're finding that you're having difficulty educating a customer or communicating with the customer, the problem is not your skill in educating. The problem is you're not listening and learning enough, right? And if you're not listening, if you're not able to get to a point of you ask questions, there is a response very, what is the word? Very crisply, or with totally no interest. This is a problem with relationship, right? So now that's the first thing I wanted to share. But the point is, even if you can do all of this, there is something that it becomes even more important: the way you see your stakeholder. Right? We had this customer who was we had this manager who was working on an engagement for a major digital transformation project in France, actually, right? And this manager had worked with a lot of US customers and was familiar with how to work with them and all that, right? Now suddenly there was a French customer, and he was just having difficulty, and he kept coming and saying, look, this customer is very difficult to work with, and that's mainly because I think there's a cultural difference, right? And everything was put on that. And as I probed further, we found out this particular person actually worked in the US and had a lot of baggage about European customers and the way of thinking. And so what we found is that mindset had to change. I mean, if you're thinking your customer is difficult and demanding, arrogant, right? All the things you talk to your fellow managers at the at the local watering hole, and then when you interact with them, all that will somehow be transmitted to your customer, right? They don't ask me why, but it just goes across. So the way you see your customer is vital, right? But more than that, the kind of person you are makes a huge difference. So we found it's just not about influencing, it's not just about skills, it's also the ability to, not so much the ability, the kind of person you are, right? And that makes a huge difference, right? And your ability to model yourself around people who use good role models. It's interesting, actually, not to have any religious connotation here. I had a customer in the US. He used to say that he would like to model his life. He was a clear, well-known leader. He would like to model his life around Jesus Christ, right? It's surprising. I mean, I was stunned, right? I never thought of role modeling myself as Ram or Krishna, but for him, it was a role modeling. And it could be, for my son, his role model is, Steve Jobs. I hope it's for the right reasons, right? But the kind of person you are. Now, what are the attributes of a kind of person you are? Someone who can trust you. I think first is competent, right? I think I don't want to miss this point. There can be a guy who is very sweet and nice and good, high integrity and everything, but I wouldn't want this person to operate on my son, right? Unless I know the person is a good surgeon, right? So competence matters, but character also matters. So, I mean, this is just a list. It's not necessarily an exhaustive list, something for you to think about, right? So, but then, there are times you have to negotiate, right? And I don't know if you've heard about this term principle negotiation. So I'm just going to talk about 4 principles here very quickly, not to necessarily elaborate on them. I'll point you to the source. This principle is a nice material. There's a book called Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. And it's an amazing book on principle negotiation. I think it applies very much to the kind of situations that people face today in the digital world. Here are the 4 principles. The first one is separate the problem from the people, right? Very easily said than done. Because, we are emotional creatures. We just can't help that, right? And, he's like that, she's like that. And, that plays a huge role in what we do. But that's the first point, okay? The second thing is focus on interests, not positions. Right? I'll park this one. I'll elaborate on that a little bit more in the next slide. Third is invent options for mutual gain. I think you don't need to go to the table with a set of options, right? I think through a discussion, you can broaden your options and look for mutual gain. And finally, insist on using some objective criteria, right? It's just not about the will, it's not about, when you go down to bargain from a street side vendor, it's often the will that wins, right? Whoever has a stronger will is always going to win. So have objective criteria. And I highly recommend reading this book, particularly for the kind of projects that we are working on. Relationship, I think it's a phenomenal book to read. Let's just explore this idea of interest versus positions, right? So what do I mean by that? See, position is something like the customer says, I want this feature by this date, right? And you, having spoken to your team members, looked at stories, sizes, estimation, come back and say, look, we can do it only 2 sprints later, right? Now there is a clear position, right? The positions are very clear, and you're not going to converge on this level of communication. So you need to go down to the next level and figure out what could be the underlying interest, why this person is taking that position. And how do you do that? For that, you have this magic technique called asking questions, right? If you learn to ask questions, you will do it. So let's take an example here. Let's take a trivial example. Let's say there's a party A who's taking a position, I want the orange, right? And for now, let's assume there's only one orange, right? And party B says, I want the orange too, right? And you're fighting this battle. You're not going to be able to resolve this at the level of position. But if you can actually think about, if you're able to ask the question, what do you want the orange for, right? And when you ask that question, the interest comes out. Let's say if party A says, I would like a glass of orange juice. And party B says, I would like the peel for a facial. Right? Now you can see it's fairly obvious. You're going to be able to sort of kind of resolve this, right, in a win-win situation because you explored the interest. Now, is this to say that in all cases things will resolve so nicely? Not necessarily, but at least it'll move you closer to a mutual gain, right? That's what we are trying to say. And the example that I was talking about, a real life example, the customer was saying, I want this feature by this date. And the team was saying, it will take you 2 more sprints. Then, we eventually found out that when the interest was explored, the customer had a conference where they wanted to do a demo of the project, right? And they said, look, I need something. Then finally, what the team actually did was they created a sort of a lightweight feature which will survive the demo, right? Which they could do in a shorter sprint. And that got the problem through. And, both were win. It was a win-win, right? So now the final thing is this: becoming a person of influence takes time and involves personal change, right? And because it involves personal change, people find this very difficult to do. Let's just quickly cover Mindshift 4. Okay, Mindshift 4 is, many of you, I'm sure, have heard about this team performance and evolution of teams, right? They go through Tuckman's model, forming, storming, norming, performing. And we talk about it could take time, right? And there is a thing that people say, it'll take different length of time cannot be predicted, but they go through these stages. They may hop between stages. I just found, people actually, the time is what people don't have, right? And often, Moses was talking about multidisciplinary teams, which is a feature of a lot of the digital projects today. So, how do you assemble the team? How do you get them to deliver quickly, right? And the mind shift has got to be that it does not take time to build a high performing team. I mean, that's how you've got to be thinking about it and find ways to accelerate teaming. I touched upon this. This is an idea of a capability and challenge. One of the challenges that, when you put a team together, specifically in IT, that I found is there'll be someone in the team who feels this is not a big challenge for them. They get bored, right? And there'll be someone else who'll be sitting there saying, oh, the challenge is too high for them. And they're sitting there wondering, I don't know if I can do it, right? But what you want is that band in between, right? Ideally. And if you're able to actually get people to move from anxiety to the flow state and boredom to what they call the flow state, you're going to find that you're going to bridge one of the biggest challenges within IT, right? With respect to teaming. So you can think about which zone you are in or your current program. And also you should think about which state, I guess, where are you first of all, right? When you got the project, are you in the anxiety zone or the boredom zone, right? And look, I think for you, there is one more rule. It doesn't matter which zone you are in, you still have to take ownership, right? The point Moses covered, okay, for the interest of the project. So there are some strategies that you can adopt to get the team to flow. One is this, for people who are anxious, give them some training, let them do some prototyping. There can be some safety nets so they don't feel like, oh my God, I'm going to be down and out, right? And find ways to motivate them. Boredom, they're bored, find ways to motivate them, obviously, and challenge them, right? Find ways to challenge them and get them to develop others, right? They should know that's a leadership skill that they need. They want to move up. Let's just talk about motivation. We talked about motivator. There's no talk about teaming which does not cover motivation, right? And it's the role of the manager. We found the most powerful motivator is hope, right? When you know there is a better future or something positive is going to happen in the future, we feel that that there is some hope, and that's called vision. Right? When you know you have a very clear positive image of the future, it makes a huge difference. So I found a single-minded focus on vision. And I tell you something, the digital transformation projects are the ideal setting for it, right? You couldn't say that. In fact, I always struggle with this when I presented to a lot of the traditional managers who are managing traditional projects. And they used to say, what is it? There's nothing, no vision here, It's a regular run-of-the-mill stuff, right, happening. So it's very important to inspire and give the team a cause beyond their own individual needs. And often, the person could be working on a what I call a very small part of that bigger program, right? But yet you got to understand what it is and communicate that to them. There was a team that was working on some APIs, right? And they were saying, another APIs. They were so to focus on technology, learning the technology. And once they learned the technology, the charm was over, right? In the month, I know all about this and what is there. But actually, they were actually working on a project where, what shall we say? It was a multidisciplinary digital transformation project. They were talking about for a courier company, the trucks and the packing density of the trucks is a key. How much can they move, right? All the boxes don't come in the same shape. So you got a truck space, you got to pack it optimally, right? So the waste is minimized. So they actually found out, through video analysis of as it was getting packed, they could actually rearrange the packing and get 10% more in that, right? That is a huge shift, right? For them, 10% faster. Every package is going to be 10% faster is a huge thing, right? And and there was another case where a customer came and convinced the team. We told the team, look, I know you're going to work on this portal. Just imagine this tomorrow. We're going to have this huge hoardings, right? All over the world where we're going to implement this, which will talk about this, and all your friends will be looking at their hoarding. And then you can actually say, hey, I worked on that, right? See, he painted a picture that really was a motivator for the team. So there's also a little bit of a personal vision and alignment. I wouldn't take too much time on this, but see, everyone has a personal vision, right? And you also obviously need to know what your organizational vision is. The key is getting to connect these two, or finding an overlap, right? Sometimes, look, personal vision, maybe I asked, we were just coaching one of the Agile teams and asked the lead, tech lead, what's the personal vision? And he actually responded, getting married, right? I mean, that was his personal vision. I asked him why, my sisters, all that, the story about the families, right? Big families, and, so it was very different. And now that was a good challenge to figure out how to connect your organizational vision to that. Anyway, eventually it had something to do with money, and it had something to do with overseas assignment, a few things that help him make money, all that stuff. But find ways to do that. So in summary, with Mindshift 4, I think, your ability to understand transformative vision, right? That means you might be working at GIC or in a service provider. It is harder for the service providers, right? Because you got to actually reach out to the customers, and you really have to reach out to the key people in the customer base who are able to actually help you show the vision, right? And connect it to the team members, individually and collectively, right? And here's just one point I've found this, that often I found managers kind of cast vision in a group. They get the whole team together and then talk about it, right? If in practice, I actually found what works is, yes, you need to do that, right? You need to do that, but you also need to cast vision one-on-one, right? Because sometimes they're not getting it, right? They're not connecting. So, I mean, in closing, Mindshift is difficult, right? Do not underestimate what this means. We may not have talked about today any glamorous things, okay? When we talk digital transformation projects, often people ask, what capability I want and what technology, all of that. But today, I really think the key to succeeding in digital transformation projects is actually this Mindshift, right? It is not magic, and interestingly, it is the hardest to achieve also, right? So, like one of our partners, Vishu, always says, to manage outside, you need to master inside, right? And maybe that's a topic for another webinar. How we do that, the techniques for managing your mind. So, but I would stop here. So, and then open it for questions. We have about, I guess, 7-8 minutes.
Yeah, hi, this is Jyoti here again. Anand, we have here. Yeah, and one of it quite interesting. So one of the participants asked, while Steve Jobs was able to create a need, how can we use this approach for service companies?
Can you repeat the questions? I think.
Yeah, sure. The question is, while Steve Jobs was able to create a need, how can this approach work for service companies?
Okay. Mute your speaker also. Okay, so let me take that. See, that's exactly what I talked about. So my interest has always been to take success and break it down, right? Now, take Steve Jobs. Now, the way he launched tablet. Now, what he did. Now, today tablet is dying, right? We really don't have, with laptops reducing in size and phones increasing in size, people really don't choose tablets as much. They're choosing, which was a few years ago, right? Now, what is this real thing? The way he positioned is very interesting. It's there in YouTube. What he said is, what cannot be done in laptop, because it is, you need physical connection, you need so many things, it is heavy, and all those things he painted about it. Then he painted about the phone. In his world, it was only the small phones, right? Till the time he lived, the phones were always small in Apple, right? So he said that is too small for doing many things. So you need something in between. So he qualified the need first, and he popularized the video so much, the talk so much, that people thought that's their need as well. And he could really find the sweet spot, right? Now, the point is, and in that process of providing that need, he really broke multiple barriers in the minds of people, right? That the barrier was, do I need another device? He make them felt that they need another device, which will come with them, and they can see the news when they need. They can carry it to meetings. They can put it there, easily project. So many barriers which were difficult with the laptop, he could really break. So he could give him something mobile, which can work as much as a laptop, but can also work like a mobile, right? So he really understood the need and broke that barrier, the people's barrier of really struggling with a larger device, right? So I think that's where the trick lies. The trick is, it's not anything rocket science. It is, if we can understand the user, really to the core. What really bothers them? It's in then asking what do you need, but then asking that question, if you really go and find out what really bothers the users, right? For example, the classical example, right? So there was a team which came up with a fantastic dashboard. Just when they were about to release, they kept on asking who fundamentally, how will you use and all these things. They figured out the users are going to be the guys on the ground in gullies and towns of small cities in India. All they needed was what needs to be delivered to that next shop and what item they don't have. That's all is their need. But they had developed a very fancy dashboard. They figured out this is not going to work. The last moment, they changed the whole thing. It will just send an SMS to the guy. This was delivered so many days back. Mostly the stock would have been over, given the past history. Go and talk to the customer and ask them, do they need another order? That's all was the final solution. A simple SMS based on data. I think understanding, going to the real user, what their challenges are, is the first key to developing that skill of identifying the barriers on the customers than the users, right? Traditionally, we used to speak, the customer is one who pays, users is one who uses, so focus on the customer. Now, I think somewhere in this digital environment, users have a huge say, not to reduce the impact of customer who pays, but I think many times users and customers are same. So even in a corporate, users have a lot of say. The more and more the engineering team can imagine the barriers for the user or understand real barriers for the user, that's where the Steve Jobs effect can be recreated by any person in the industry or in the engineering team. That's my view on it.
I guess for those other questions, we should be able to respond with answers through email.
Yeah, sure. It'll be good.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining.